with our nutrition chats here. So we've highlighted a few key aspects to nutrition so far around why it's even important to focus on nutrition. We talked a little bit about how much should we even be eating and consuming. And so today we thought it'd be helpful to have a short chat just about what to eat, because I don't know about you, but every time you open up, whether it's social media, a magazine, look at the news, there's always some new way that we're supposed to eat that's going to give us all the magic benefits that we're striving for. And
hmm
it doesn't have to be so complicated.
it really doesn't. No, there's a simple way, and it's funny because all of the trends that you see do include this one thing, right? Whether it's the Mediterranean diet, keto, or I don't even, some other, oh, paleo, yeah, some other like hot button ones. It's always a focus on protein, and that is what it all comes back to: is making sure that we're getting a crap ton of protein.
Yeah, and when we look at, fitness in 100 words, what's interesting is it says eat meat and vegetables, nuts and seeds, some fruit, little starch, no sugar. And so it gives us this kind of nice framework, or this nice
hmm
kind of starting off point of like, okay, what should we even think about? And for most of us, we would use the term whole foods, not necessarily the grocery store, but
hmm
they sell a lot of them there. But whole foods in the term of like, these have single ingredient lists. So if
hmm
you were to look at what are the ingredients for chicken and beef or vegetables, it's like that's it. It is just that specific piece of food. And I think that's a great place for a lot of us to start, because most of us have found convenience and other factors that lead us to eat a lot of things that what we would call are processed, or things that have multiple ingredients, or things that are pretty easy, pretty convenient. But those aren't always the best when it comes
hmm
to being able to hit our goals or perform a certain way, look a certain way, etc. So I think starting off there of just, we got to eat whole unprocessed foods for a majority of our nutrition, I would
hmm
say.
Yeah. And that doesn't mean like you have to take out all the fun stuff. It just means that the majority of the time, 80%, we are only eating whole foods. But that 20%, you don't have to give up everything that you love just to eat healthy. We can still have a little bit of fun in that 20% uh, as we're going through the week, right? Uh, but yeah, making sure that we're prioritizing those whole foods, shopping the outside of the grocery store. So hitting the vegetables, the deli section, the meat section, all that kind of stuff. And then frozen foods, there are some high quality things there. But again, just look at that ingredient list. The shorter, the better. And then you can, you don't always have to buy fresh. We can go frozen, but definitely just giving that back of the package a look to make sure that they're not sneaking in any extra ingredients on you.
Yeah, and I think that's important as a starting off point, because when we start seeing clients and trying to figure out what's going to work best for them, having that sort of as the foundation of like, where are the areas or where are the places we can have more unprocessed or more whole foods.
hmm
And then once we start to identify some of those areas, this is where I think we start to get into, like you said, some of the nuances of like, well, let's look at how much protein are we eating, or carbs or fats or things like that. And there's a lot of different systems and ways that people either like to track or try and solve the problem or try and figure that out. We kind of take the approach that for most people, and so caveat there, most people, the very minute and exact details aren't as relevant so much as sort of like the big general themes. Are we
hmm
getting enough protein in for our current body size or what we're striving to do? Are we getting enough unprocessed foods in our diet? And if we can hit that, most folks will find that they are looking, feeling, performing just the way they want. And you
hmm
mentioned this idea of a crap ton of protein. So I think it's a good place for us to chat when we think about the what to eat and we start looking at this idea of protein. What are we looking at in terms of either amount or types of protein that are going to help us to hit those goals that we're striving for?
So the end all be all goal would definitely be one, and this is a personal opinion. So, but we don't all need to hit this number, but it would be 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight. So if you are 150 pounds, you are trying to get in 150 grams of protein. And that's just a good parameter to go off of. It's going to be plenty to fill you up, to fuel you, and to make sure that you don't have any room in your belly to fit in the snacks and the processed food. Because if you're pushing in a gram of protein per pound of body weight, you're not going to be that hungry. Like, you're not going to want to snack on those processed foods for sure.
Yeah, and what's interesting about that, specifically that number, is that's going to help with muscle repair, muscle regeneration. So for those who have active jobs, those who like to do a little fitness or working out, that's why protein is such an important piece of our nutrition, of our habits, is to get those in, because we want to be able to refuel our body, and it also helps keep us a little bit more full. And so
Hmm.
if you're wondering, well, what does that actually, equate to, 150 grams? Well, typically, if we're getting in the nitty gritty here, you can multiply that by 4 in terms of grams to transition into calories. So you'd be looking at a good 600 or so calories for a 150-pound person of your intake, which it's a
Hmm.
pretty good amount. I mean, you're looking at
Yeah.
30 to 40% of your intake being protein. And that's a really great place to be. And then what do we want to do with the others? The other calories or grams we've got left? Well, we can talk about that. But once again, if we're filling our plates with those whole unprocessed foods, you're going to be very surprised at what you can eat. And you're going to be like, I'm eating so much food.
Yeah.
But the reason is because the density isn't quite as high. So a
Hmm.
plate full of vegetables or a plate full of potatoes is going to fill you up more, and it's going to feel like a lot more than maybe a processed version of something
Hmm.
that you're eating. So I think protein is always a really good place to start. We kind of identify, here's about how much of the ballpark we'd like to be in, and let's make sure we get the protein intake that's going to help us to feel good, be able to perform, be able to recover, probably even build a little bit of muscle, which most of us
Hmm.
are interested in doing. And then we can work off of that. And so if people are sitting there like, okay, well, protein, what is that? Or what are the sources? Where am I pulling from for that? What are some of the sources that we can pull from when it comes to protein?
Now, if we're looking at just protein and we're trying not to get in any extra fat on that protein, we're going to look at, chicken breasts, turkey, the ground version of that as well, but make sure you check the package because they will throw in a little fat in those ground versions. A leaner beef, 97.3 on a ground beef, which, I mean, it's up to you. But and then we've got in terms of like fish, we can go shrimp. Shrimp is a really good one. It's pure protein, and then tilapia is the white fish. Is going to have less fat in it. Now, if you like to have a little fat in your fish and you're okay with that, then we can go into the salmon or the tuna. That's going to be kind of an even number there. And then in terms of meat, the fattier meats are going to be the ground beefs. Pork loin is actually pretty lean, less fat there, lots of protein. But like a pork shoulder or pork butt, that's going to have a little bit more fat. And then the steaks will have some more fat as well. Oh, and chicken thighs too. But the good thing about meat sources is you don't have to worry about the carbs cutting in. It's just a lot of extra fat in there, but that's just flavor, really.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. So that's where you see one of the first pieces of the world class fitness in 100 words. They talk about eat meat, because
Hmm.
for most folks, that's going to be a really positive or great source to get in some of the protein that we're looking for. And the leaner you stay, the higher the protein content is going to be compared to some of the fat, which is great for our day to day. Now, there are going to be some folks out there who maybe meat isn't in their nutrition pattern, or it's not
Hmm.
something that they want to subscribe to. That doesn't mean you're still not able to get protein in.
Hmm.
There's just different sources that we might be pulling from. And so, depending on some of your nutrition habits, we can still pull some protein from sources like dairy, or even things like eggs. But if we're venturing down the path of like, hey, vegan or no sources like that, then we're probably going to have to go look to some different uh, vegetables or things like that to derive some of that protein. So there's
Yeah.
different ways that we can get there.
Yeah, you can definitely get into the soy, the what is it, pea
Tofu.
protein, tofu, yeah, all those type of things, a lot of legumes. And it can be done. It's just going to be a little bit of extra work because you're definitely going to have it a lot of there's going to be more carbs and fat into those proteins, but it can be done with a vegetarian diet as well.
Yeah. And one of the things I think we find in chatting with folks is they're almost surprised at how much they're being asked to eat when it comes to protein. Because especially if it's not something we've focused on before, of putting a little bit in with each meal or a little bit in with each snack, you start to find out pretty quickly that, wow, I could go a whole day and not eat very much protein if I'm eating all
Hmm.
these other types of food. And you get to the end of your day and you're like, oh, I didn't really have much at all. And
Yeah.
so even just starting off with planning like, hey, are there ways we can get a little bit of protein in with every meal? And then maybe even some snacks or things like that that can help us to get some of that in. People get surprised at how much we don't eat protein and how much we eat of the carbs and the fats and
Yeah.
things like that.
We've gotten a lot of bad information from society, really. People are like, oh, I had peanut butter. And I'm like, well, that's great. There's a little bit of protein in there, but there's more fats and carbs in there. But we've been told that nuts are a great source of protein, but they also are a big source of other things too. So you got to do a little extra research or turn to someone to help you kind of figure out the best places to get that protein from.
Yeah. And some folks might then ask, well, like, how much should I be having at
Hmm.
each sitting? And one kind of simple way without needing to worry so much about weighing and measuring and doing all this stuff is just to go off of like the size of your hand.
Hmm.
So if we look at a serving of protein, it's probably about the size of your palm. So if you got,
Yeah.
piece of chicken, some turkey, some beef, any of those meat sources that we highlighted, if it's about the size of your palm, it's probably about 4 ounces or something like that. That can be plenty just to make
Hmm.
sure we get a little bit of that on there. And then if we
Yeah.
start looking at, well, what about the other sources? If you start looking at about a fist is probably a serving size of carbohydrates. If that's, your rices or your potatoes or anything like that, put about a fist size on your plate. It's probably going to be a pretty good amount. And then the last little bit you can fill up with different vegetables, fruits, etc. Once again, probably about the same size. And if your plate generally looks like that of,
Hmm.
I've got about palm size of protein, we've got a fist size of some carbs, and I've got some fruits and vegetables or even some like fats like avocado on there, like you're going to be in a pretty good spot, especially if we're doing that pretty consistently.
Yeah, definitely. And it may seem aggressive at first. It will take a little bit more prep on the personal end, especially if you during the week you don't have time to cook or things like that. It takes a little more prep on the weekends and things like that. It's not as easy of a grab and go type of lifestyle. But you'll find that routine and it will pay off in the end to be eating those whole foods. You're just gonna feel a lot better. And there are a few grab and go items you can have, like beef jerky, like the whatever
If you've
they
got
are, the
some
sticks and stuff.
refrigeration,
Yeah.
people love yogurt or things like that. That can be
Hmm.
really great sources.
Deli slices, all that kind of stuff.
Exactly. So there's different ways that you can get there, just being aware
Hmm.
of sort of where you're going, what you have access to, that type of stuff. And so for most folks, if we just generally kind of start in that world, you're going to be surprised at how quickly you'll start to feel good, move towards your goals. And then if we've been doing that for a while and you're interested in being a little bit more what would you say, specific
Hmm.
around some of your eating patterns, we can certainly get into the weeds a little bit more. But I think for the general population, that's just a really good starting spot of
Yeah,
thinking about whole unprocessed foods, making sure I'm getting some protein in, making sure I'm getting a little bit of carbs in, making sure I'm getting some fats in, and just having my plate look generally like that. And I think you'll be surprised at how good you'll feel and the results you're going to get.
I agree. It's a little extra work, but it's definitely worth it in the long run.
Yeah. So for this particular chat, we were looking at just some of the types of foods that we're going to be interested in. We really want to focus in on protein, especially for folks who are trying to be active and trying to incorporate some workouts into their routine, a little bit of those carbs, a little bit of those fats. We'll continue to dive into some of these other topics. But I think for most folks, it's a good general starting spot of why we focus on nutrition. When you think about how much we should be eating, and then we start looking at what are the types of foods we want to incorporate and eat. And this really does come back to this idea of decisions and habits, which we'll
Hmm.
highlight as we continue to move forward as well.
Sounds good. I'm excited.
Yeah, me too. So happy to get back on here with our chats. So for Brad and Chelsea, this has been a Greater Culture Chats focusing on what types of foods should we be focusing on or eating. And we look forward to coming at you with the next nutrition chat coming up soon.
Bye.